Atlantic City it starts really before Atlantic City. It begins as Absecon Island or Absecon Beach or Leeds Beach, because in the late 1600s and early 1700s, a family that had just migrated from England came here with funds and began to buy land. The man happened to be the surveyor general of the state of New Jersey, and so he could survey and give himself whatever lands he wanted. And it turns out that his great-grandson, Jeremiah, was a Quaker, and he became a Revolutionary War fighter when the British stole his cattle, and he became a first lieutenant. And after the war was over, he began buying pieces of land on the islands, particularly what we call Absecon Island today, which is Atlantic City. Now, the reason he did this is because that's how they grazed cattle in those days. They would swim them out in the spring, let them graze on the barrier islands, which were much more fertile than they are today, and then they'd swim them back in the late fall and put them on the mainland. And so he really bought the island. He bought about 1,100 acres, which comprised the whole island except for 100 acres. So at one time, Jeremiah Leeds owned Atlantic City. For whatever reason, he didn't make out a will, and so the Orphans Court in New Jersey had to be convened, and they divided his land up amongst his 8 children. And those children finally, in 1854 and thereafter, began selling off pieces of it and making Atlantic City what it is today.
In 1614, Dutch explorer Captain Cornelius Jacob May sailed from Holland to the New Jersey coast, seeking trade with the Indians and giving new names to the various creeks, rivers, and inlets he discovered. On his second voyage in 1623, he brought with him 24 followers, settling on the Delaware River. Captain May would become Director General of this new Dutch colony and thereby cast his name permanently upon the Cape Peninsula. In March 1633, another Dutch fur trader, Captain David de Vries, wrote in his journal, "Our people have caught 7 whales. Could have had more with good spears." Before long, word would travel. The waters off the Jersey shore were a good hunting ground for whales. Whaling in Delaware Bay would help to create the first settlement in Cape May County as early as 1650. This small whaling village near the Cape May Point became known as Town Bank. Most of those who settled there came from New England and Long Island. The Town Bank whalers would gather on a high bluff, overlooking the point where Delaware Bay met the Atlantic Ocean. Once they had spotted a whale, the men would row out in wooden boats and harpoon it. In an attempt to escape, the mighty whale would tow the boat and crew. When it tired, the crew's captain would drive a lance into the powerful giant, causing it to spout blood, or pillars of fire, as it was called. It would then be towed back to the beach, where the blubber and baleen were processed. A whale might be 60 feet long, weigh 250 tons, and yield over $1,000 worth of whale oil and whalebone. A whaler who lived to tell his tale and collect his money was very well paid. Over time, this small whaling village of Town Bank was gradually claimed by the sea. It now lies beneath the waves off the Cape May coast. In the early 1700s, a whaler from New England named Aaron Inman purchased some land on Long Beach. He would raise 3 sons to follow in his footsteps. On a visit to the Inman's home, one could find a cauldron and furnace for boiling blubber and large whale bones bleaching in the sun. The first Europeans to arrive on New Jersey shores had very little interest in building settlements right on the ocean. Needing protection from the harsh winters and heavy storms, they settled a mile or so inland. The shorefront, to the early farmers and pioneers, was considered practically worthless. Property inland also brought a higher value than land along the coast. In the 1670s, Burlington Quaker Thomas Budd owned a large tract of land on both sides of the Great Egg Harbor River, including Absecon Island and much of what is now Atlantic City. The price for his oceanfront land was valued at 4 cents an acre. Property on the mainland went for 40 cents an acre, 10 times that amount. That same beachfront property would sell today for millions of dollars. For the next 100 years, aside from the Indians, Absecon Island's only visitors would be ambitious hunters and some of the early mainland settlers. Among these brave souls was Jeremiah Leeds. Born in Leeds Point in 1754, he was the first white man to build a permanent structure on the island in 1785. His home and farm was called Leeds Plantation, where he grew corn and rye and raised cattle. Jeremiah and his family were the first official residents of what would become Atlantic City. Throughout the 1700s, there were just a few settlements scattered along the coast. Many of those living along the barren beachfront made their living raising livestock or gathering oysters. By 1720, the Quakers had settled the Little Egg Harbor area, and boat building had become a thriving industry. Tall-masted sailing ships filled the Mullica River. A number of sawmills were in operation, and hundreds of men would be in the nearby swamps cutting down cedar trees. By 1750, the area had become a port of trade, attracting merchants from New York City and Philadelphia. It was said that the men ate and drank well, while the women wore imported silks and apparel from all over the world. Adventurous travelers also visited Long Beach to the north, often setting up tents on the beach, bringing their own supplies and provisions. In 1765, Reuben Tucker purchased the entire barrier island of Short Beach and named it after himself. he opened his home to guests and promoted it for the health and entertainment of pleasure seekers. Each passing year brought more and more visitors, and festive beach parties were as common then as they are today. Young Quaker men and women were well aware that a severe reprimand could be awaiting them when they returned home from a night of dancing and partying in the ballroom at Tucker's boarding house. Further north, between the Navesink and Shrewsbury rivers, stood the Blackpoint Tavern. Open as early as 1722, promoted excellent fishing along with invigorating sea air. People were beginning to see the beauty and the benefits that the coast had to offer, and these places were among the earliest summer resorts on the Jersey Shore.